All right, we're streaming on YouTube now. Welcome everybody. There'll be a little pause here as I unmute on the other. There's a woman's talk and there's a guys, and so it'll be the Q&A. So you guys will hear just kind of how the dialogue goes. What's up, ladies? We're here. I'm on 2 Zoom streams, and you guys hear me? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it can be interactive if you want. I'm streaming the guys' side to the YouTube channel so people can see that if they want. They may be able to hear you, but they can't see you. And I have until 3:45, so just under 30 minutes now. Uh, Here in Vegas, you know, and with the lifestyle, my yoga is condensing even more it's under 30 down into the essential movements that I need for balance. And it was very interesting because I know that some of the yoga techniques, I don't want to say they're lost because I proved it to myself really with the guitar, where some of the techniques I knew were so elaborate and yet years since I played them, but picking it up in repetition, it's like it's there. The muscle memory is there, the sound, the ear, it's even better in some ways. So I know it's like that with the yoga and other even wrestling as I'm teaching the wrestling. It's even longer since I'd wrestled. But it's something about it's like I've chewed on it, I've processed it like through TM or whatever. I have a lot of uh recollections of wrestling and all kinds of imaginings and de-stressing, that kind of stuff. But in the process of de-stressing that, it's almost like I get better at the wrestling because I'm feeling it. I'm imagining it would be not much different than back when I was competing, visualizing myself grappling and visualizing a successful takedown. So as you take your imagination through the scenario and you imagine it, you feel it, and you create neural connections that can play out in real life. Like I could imagine singing the song, and if I do it clearly, I'll do it better when I actually am singing the song. I can imagine playing guitar. And if I really see every note, every pluck, every movement, and feel it as if I'm doing it, my imagination makes my nervous system react, or however you say it, nervous system reacts to my imagination. It creates those connections that will are necessary to do the motion. So it is that with the yoga also to some extent. And while I struggle almost to hold on to the techniques that I love so much, I found solace. Like, what's that word mean? Let's just find it. Comfort or consolation in a time of distress or sadness. Okay, sure. I found solace in the yoga stretches, the breath holding, when I came to yoga. And it's always there. It's something that I can get infinitely better at. The refinements of relaxation, alignment, whatever. You can also get skewed off into, space. And so you start distorting your breath hold, distorting your posture, distorting your technique. Um, but infinite levels of refinement. So it's almost like I struggle to hold on to the techniques as I accelerate my lifestyle, the higher levels of responsibility, of money, of relationships, of, did I say responsibility? A power, influence, which is another way of saying responsibility. And because if you have more influence and you don't have more responsibility, you will soon lose that power of influence because people won't listen to it anymore. You got to be responsible with it to keep it. So maybe you could get by a little bit with some power, but you'll lose it if you're not responsible with it. Same thing with responsibility. If you take more and more responsibility, power will come your way because power goes to what's responsible for it. Nature will hand it over to the person that takes responsibility. Uh, but it's an actual responsibility, an ability to respond, not just taking charge and giving orders and it might seem like you're taking responsibility, but if you're creating havoc, then you're not really able to respond. You're just taking control of certain situations about it. So as I struggle to hold on to these yoga techniques, it's really appropriate because my yoga, the ninth limb, was always built on the idea of yoga. It sounds cheesy to say like yoga to the people, but it's like bringing yoga to the society, to the social aspect of humanity, of human existence, and not be isolated with the yoga. Although I always recognize you get better at it when you practice alone in isolation. It's appropriate that I'm not so deep into an isolated practice of yoga if this is the yoga of bringing it to the social landscape. And so there's a balance happening. As I'm less and less practicing the physical yoga, I'm coming more into a balance where it's like the old analogy of nourishment for a plant, potassium, nitrogen, and phosphorus. And maybe I personally have an affinity to phosphorus. I just love phosphorus. And so I want to keep doing phosphorus, but the plant isn't going to grow if I just keep applying phosphorus. I have to pull back on the phosphorus and put more nitrogen and potassium so it's in a balance so that the plant grows to optimal. And so people I consider my yoga practice so nourishing, but maybe in some aspects growing up or whatever upbringing, maybe I was deficient in potassium in this analogy. Self-care. I definitely wasn't as deficient in isolation. I did a lot of things alone. I was always playing video games, watching TV, cutting weight in my misery, just fucking tolerating it somehow. But having a practice of presence, because I think all the things that I did to cope with cutting weight or, whatever was escaping versus being present with what I'm doing. Maybe sometimes I use yoga to escape, but so much of it is getting present with how it feels, how you breathe. What are you perceiving? The quality of the yoga, it didn't take more than a year or two to realize that what I'm thinking about is affecting the quality of my yoga experience. And if I'm finding solace in my yoga experience, then I gotta get a hold of this thing somehow. And my evolution has discovered that so many of the things that you do outside of the yoga practice affects your thinking in the yoga practice. For example, if you have a miscommunication with someone and you're thinking about it, it's hard to practice. So the only way to avoid that is, well, let's say the only ways to resolve, okay. So you can either avoid it or resolve it. Let's say it like that. So you can avoid communicating with people, then you won't have miscommunications. That won't solve it because you're going to be talking to yourself a lot. You're a talking machine. That's what a human is. So you're just going to have all this chit chat and you're still going to be reacting to your mind. You're going to have a bunch of miscommunications internally with yourself. The way to solve it is right, if your room is messy, you can look away and never look at it, and then you never have to deal with a messy room, or you can look at it and fix it. But there's really, what else is there to do? You could live in it and just complain about it, but not do anything about it, ignore it, or fix it. And so that's miscommunication, is you got to fix your communication for the sake of having a quality yoga practice. It's endless. That you'll always just keep getting better and better communication. It's the tragic humor of it, because you'll get better at communication. When you get better at communication, part of that is taking more responsibility for how you communicate. Not taking responsibility for how you feel, taking responsibility for how you communicate. Totally different. Notice the difference. Whether you take responsibility for how you feel or not isn't my concern. My concern is how you communicate, because that's what's going to affect me, is how you communicate. How you feel doesn't affect me unless you communicate it. You could communicate it all silent, passive aggressively, but that's still a communication. Or you can communicate it in some way or whatever, this way, that way. What I perceive and what affects me will be what's communicated, not the internal subjective experience. So knowing that any miscommunication will negatively affect my yoga practice, my meditation. Now, that's the stuff that life is made of. That's the stuff that evolution is made of. That's how do you get better? You either learn it perfectly all from the beginning, or you got to learn. And then how do you learn? Make mistakes. See better ways of doing things. Sometimes you learn from a reference, a teacher or a role model. A teacher doesn't have to be the teacher. It could be anywhere. You see a movie and you see a scene. Oh, I could do it like that. Like you get references. You could read, get references, information, trial and error. Make a mistake, reflect on it, find a better way. And, but so as you get better at communication, you'll take responsibility for communication. Power will go to the person that takes responsibility. As you get more power and more influence because you're better at communicating, now the stakes get higher. Now miscommunications hurt more. That's the trap. So again, the solution is run away, sit in it and complain, or fix it. Just where we started, where you either run away from communicating, which doesn't solve it because you're going to talk to yourself and it's a downward spiral. Doesn't work. Or you sit in it and complain, which most people do. It's kind of another form of avoiding. Or you solve it. You go into it and figure out how to do this. And it's an endless journey because you get more power, more influence, so then new problems. They say new levels bring new devils. There's new problems as you go up. You get promoted to the next level at whatever, you're going to have new communication problems that you didn't have to deal with before. The only thing that changed is your responsibility and influence. You didn't change just because you got promoted or whatever. It's just you now have new problems that you haven't figured out yet. And any miscommunications will be felt. So that's the mental evolution. And then the Maya, the illusion, is that is the experience. That's the existence. That's the mental existence. As a spirit, you're going through life, and this your spirit will be either suffering or playing or whatever, any number of distinctions, but you'll be on this polarity, negative or positive. The soul will live through the theater of your mind, negative or positive experiences. And you wouldn't know that unless you separate. You just identify with the mind unless you separate. And you go along with it. And then you can learn mental mastery, communication skills, self-improvement, all that stuff, self-image, everything that's mental, of the mental stuff. But if you don't have soul wisdom, soul insight, soul distinction, the mind is just filled with so many things that you didn't put there, and it's under bombardment. It's bombarded endlessly on this planet through people's communications first and foremost, will indirectly influence you. What are their influences? You can maybe you don't watch the news, but anybody that talks to you that watches the news, you're just 1 degree of separation. You don't think that cancerous fear, negativity is not contagious through communication? That's what it is. So, and you'll always deal with it. You're not gonna not deal with it. The only solution is handle it. How to handle communication so that you can find solace. I don't like that word right now. I found it because it's comfort or consolation. I like that part, but in a time of distress or sadness, there's probably a better word. Maybe just find comfort. To find the deeper comfort in your yoga practice, you learn to handle the communications in your life, just like you learn to handle the guitar, or you learn to handle your voice, or you learn to handle anything you learn to handle. And so the separation I'm talking about is like a distinction of the soul from the mind is not easy to always have. You get sucked into your mind. And if you put too much effort into separating and being like a soul awareness, you'll be tight, you'll be rigid, you'll actually lose presence because you'll be so introverted. So it's something that you train, you get better with, and well, that's the duality that we're playing with. We have the mind and this 3D world that we experience through our mind, and then we have the soul that whether even if we were deaf, dumb, and blind, we'd have a witness inside witnessing our deaf, dumb, and blindness and whatever we could perceive in that state. And both are happening always. And you have attention, and it's either identified with the mind or it's identified with the self. Identified with the mind or identified with the self. So that would be the spiritual practice of living. And we have our isolated spiritual practices like TM, yoga, or whatever to cultivate self-awareness. And we have our ambitions, our outreach, what we do that connects us with people to lead them. Because just by virtue that you're here hearing this information on this path with this information, who the hell else are you going to follow? You're cursed to have to lead because you're already better than everybody around you just by having this information. That doesn't mean you never have someone, you pay someone to teach you something or whatever, but I'm just saying, like, it's almost like as the student or the client, if you go to someone to teach you whatever, you almost got to lead them to teach you. It'll be so refreshing when you meet a teacher that you go to learn some skill or something from, and they really know how to like lead and teach. And then even then they're going to lack self-awareness. They're not, you'll be disappointed because you're holding on to a prior version of your own evolution and you've evolved past that, and you'll recognize it eventually. You're not able to recognize it yet because you haven't yet cognized it to be able to recognize it, to recognize it. So it's not recognizable until you really cognize it. And that's not easy to truly admit to yourself that you've evolved past the people around you. But then what? Or does that mean, again, you got to take responsibility for your communication? So if you communicate in ways that because you're so much better than everybody, you're going to agitate them because you talk down to them or whatever, Well, you got to evolve in that and evolve in your ability to communicate. It's not enough to just be aware of things. That's like saying I hear the perfect music in my head, but I pick up the guitar and it sounds like trash. It's not enough to just think about I'm such a good communicator. Think about I'm so evolved. Maybe the coordination isn't there to actually communicate. Okay. I don't even know why I said this was a Q&A. I just kind of started talking. So this is a Q&A, everybody. So go ahead. What do you think?
What you were just saying, right? You used to teach us about the witness and silent flute all the time. And just as you were speaking right now, it's something that I've been reflecting on as I've noticed just the separation. It happens very naturally, like almost these different moments that feel so peaceful inside. They feel so relaxing inside. Maybe a moment full of gratitude where all of a sudden I feel this separation as I can see my body living whatever I'm doing, and then I can see like myself watching my experience at the same time, and it just feels very, very relaxing. I don't know if I feel this 24/7, but just this knowledge of it having happened to me, it gives me almost like room to explore that feeling in yoga and like at work or whenever I'm living life. And so I think that's super dope. The
It is.
witness.
Yeah, it is super dope. It's the dopest. It's the most dope. That's right. What an amazing blessing.
Like what happened to me last night with identifying with that negative thought, which was almost like you were talking about it on your podcast, like the demon thoughts. And it's just what about those times that people don't become aware? Like what if like I have a negative thought and I don't realize like this isn't me and have this like emotional outburst or some kind of an emotional, reaction to it that could be a survival issue. Anyway, I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about that before you end it. That that's like the Maya. That's like so much of the illusion. How do you separate in that moment sometimes if you're not aware?
Well, the physical leads to the mental. So, when that's happening, when you're getting pulled into thoughts and perceptions, negativity, all these imaginings, when you're no longer using your imagination's using you, then there are physical symptoms like tension, poor posture, poor breathing, facial tension in all kinds of ways. Um, Different habits, maybe different cravings, things like that, that will be signposts or signals to your state of mind so that you can become aware again because ignorance is happening. And um, even the ignorance of such and such situation or such and such feeling is happening. Therefore, I'm always going to feel this way. It's all is lost, and it's like it's making what's definitely temporary a permanent. It's making what's temporary a forever thing. And that's an ignorant thought because it's obviously false. But in the moment, we're ignorant. We're reacting as if this is the final state of things, and that's why I have to do something so aggressively about it. And those are the physical symptoms. As you learn your own physical, I don't know if symptoms is the right word, but physical signals or whatever that indicate your state of mind, more and more as you get more and more familiar over time, you get more familiar, you start to see the thought processes that happen before the physical signals. And so you catch them sooner and sooner and sooner. And this is very related to the game of mastering communication, because so much of handling a communication problem, there were things that happened before it. It didn't just all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Jesus, the earth opened up and there was a communication problem right there. it was like probably a little bit of miscommunication in the sentence before that, a little bit before that. Well, it's going the wrong way back there. Like if you ever heard me say on a text, you're going the wrong way. It's not yet a problem. I'm just saying it's going the wrong way. That's this. I've recognized these are steps happening before a problem. So I'm going to cut it before it gets to a problem because I don't need a problem in my life. That's all the problems I had in my life. I mean, at some point I turn adult. I live for myself. I know whatever. Like there's always an interconnectedness with parents and upbringing, whatever. But at some point, you take responsibility for your life, and at that point, all of my problems have become self-created because I'm making the decisions that are creating my problems in life. I'm just not aware because I'm identified with my habits as if that's who I am. And it's hard to step out of it. There's a lot of unknown, and the world's abusive. And so if you're naive, then you just get taken advantage of. That's why people don't want to do the unfamiliar stuff, rightfully so. And so again, but if you take responsibility for your life, like how do you start? You know. So if you catch yourself negative, okay, yeah, you catch the earlier symptoms, the mind, and this becomes really a knowledge of cause and effect, just in the same sense that all the yogis talked about. I think it would be very difficult if Michael Singer, let's say, was making very bad decisions in life, risky decisions, bad health decisions, bad diet decisions, bad communication decisions, how long he'd really be able to keep his peace. It's not that he's so special and therefore he can get away with anything and still keep his peace. It's that he's modified all his decisions and ways of communicating so that he can live with himself later. And still miscommunications happen, problems happen. He's at a high power level. There's a lot of people listening to him. He makes one wrong word and he's going to hear a lot of feedback about it. That's a lot of future problems if he makes one unconscious decision. Now, that's power and influence as you move up. So that's just an example. So it's not that they're so special. Maharishi is so special. Maharishi is a genetic being that was maybe reincarnated of a previous. I mean, sure, everybody's reincarnated, but made the decisions, born in the right place. Okay, but in his life, I'm sure there were people that were born around the same time in the same town that made different decisions and had a completely different outcome in life. And we could say, well, genetically or karmically and this and that, but at some point, like I made these decisions. I made these decisions. I don't know what to say else about it. Like DNA, two guys, you feed them the same food, they grow to different heights. They both want to play in the NBA. So maybe it's possible. If he's over 5'3", it's probably possible. Most guys will be over 5'3". If he's under 5'3", it might not be possible. But that's the limit of the analogy because basketball is a surrogate for purpose. Like, what are you doing with your life? Versus the spiritual aspirant, you could be 2 foot tall or 20 feet tall, go and meditate in a cave in the Himalayas. You could still realize yourself. That's because the spiritual path undercuts all other paths. Because no matter what other path you're doing, you could have the spiritual path. So, if I recall what we were saying, unconscious negativity, before I realize, yeah, it's just that's the awareness, catching the landslide before it starts to be the whole side of the mountain. Recognize the avalanche when it's just the first few crumples. You know what I mean? And then take shelter, get out of the way, or do something, block it. And it's a new level. It's just it happens again and again because you will level up. You will be promoted in life in some way at your job or just in life, promoted to more influence, and new problems will happen. So you will have to address your own habit of how you handle when you make a mistake. It's not just resolved in what you say or always knowing what to say. It is the default autopilot of your baseline, your character. How do you respond to the unknown? How do you respond to a perceived disrespect or a perceived threat? In addition to handling the threat, to handling the disrespect, how do you respond to when you're perceiving disrespect? And that'll be the natural evolution, because the more you handle disrespect, the more you'll discover that sometimes you were not being disrespected. You were incorrect in your perception. But by going into the communication, that's how you discover, oh, they didn't even mean that. Oh, you misheard. Oh, you misunderstood. Oh. And so you'll end up, again, further solving future problems ahead of time by having the kind of character that doesn't react in a way that creates future problems, if that makes sense. Like, you react in a, you'll learn. Here would be an example, and then I got to end it. Sometimes, let's say somebody's rude to me. Let's say a waitress is rude to me, and she says something condescending. Like, y'all have to order drinks. Everybody has to order a drink if you're going to stay here. Like, whoa, you got to say it like that? So maybe a less developed, but yet still above everybody else developed, because I'm going to confront the situation. I'm not going to be, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's already further along than most people. I may be like, hey, you can't talk disrespect, and boom, if she's got any strength or attitude or fucking whatever, a chip on her shoulder, it may go back and forth. They get kicked out. We're yelling. Who knows? It could really create problems that then really will affect my meditation later. Or this, let's say it's not either or, because there's 1,000 stages of evolution in between. Incremental evolutions. But let's say after a while, now I'm at this stage of evolution where it's not like I have to do the down dog 10,000 times to learn all the distinctions I'm telling you. I now know these distinctions. So even if it's your first down dog, you might be like, why do I got to do it like this? Why do I got to do it like this? I've handled a lot of problems you're going to come across by doing it like this. You may not feel those problems yet. And that's the struggle of like the teacher student. So let's say the lady said, oh, you all got to stay here. You all got to order drinks if you're going to stay here. And instead of, maybe I could say something, but maybe I could just hold eye contact. And some situations, she will realize that she was rude by giving her 5 seconds of eye contact space, that she's like, and then she changes. And now in 5 seconds, I've 100% resolved the miscommunication, versus going back and forth for 5 minutes and then thinking about it for 5 weeks. That's the evolution of handling, where it's like sometimes handling is not handling, but handling, it's like it's a balance. You got to measure for yourself what's going to, be the most biggest win here. The win for me, the win for them, the win for the universe. Overall win. And the root of that is you. You can't win. The universe can't win at your expense. That's the wrong equation. You got to always win first. But if you want to get anywhere in life, make sure the other person's winning. And then if you really want to get somewhere in life, make sure humanity wins because of what just happened. And then, the puzzle of life is figuring that out for all the situations. That's called its responsibility. And that's what the Neanderthals that watch the NFL and, drink beer and go to bars or whatever, they're never going to be there. You just use them to pay your bills. Sell them some of your services. And maybe some of them, the fire of awareness will light in them by interacting with you. One candle can light them all. But you still got to live and win at life. Nobody wants to be lit by a whack candle, to make sense. They want the most aesthetic, the beautiful, the most I mean, the analogy doesn't exactly work for the candle because at the end of the day, it just needs to be a flame. But they won't get close to the flame. They won't even get close enough to the flame to ignite themselves if the candle wasn't attractive enough. It doesn't mean just your makeup. I mean, as a man too, like attractive enough, like succeeding wholesomely, happily, fulfilled, and that can't be faked. So you got to do it. So how do you do it? That's the puzzle you got to solve, but don't lose the spiritual life along the way. Like Michael Singer would show, I don't know why I'm recalling him. I haven't been listening to him at all, but I don't even know if he said this. It's something I've gotten from that practice that a lot of times, just like the eye contact, if I held eye contact with that rude waitress for 5 seconds, I'm burning in hell for 5 seconds because my whole body wants to stand up, yell, this and that. But by weathering that, now it's like perfectly resolved. And now the Shakti flows afterwards like, oh, I'm so fucking powerful. A surge of bliss that wasn't available. It was the pendulum. I went into hell and then I went into heaven. Just by holding the eye contact. Instead of just outflowing the emotions as if that was going to solve it. No, that's just an expression of my inability to handle what's going on. Which is really what's going on is whatever I'm feeling inside. It's not the outside. So, what Michael Singer, one thing I've learned is that by pausing but confronting but pausing, it evolves faster. Even though it's harder. Maybe that's why. Going into it out of habit or, you know, the samskara, the fucking habits, delays evolution. That's not evolving. That's just taking time, and you only have so much time. Okay, so this is all great. I have another meeting at 4. I hope you got something from it. Hope it was good for you. And I'll see you girls tomorrow. I'll probably teach yoga. Everybody on YouTube, I teach yoga. This was just a yoga mindset talk. But every Saturday and Sunday, I teach 9 p.m. yoga online. And you could join. It's $66 a month. You get, I think there's like 55 recordings already. And you get all those and then ongoing twice a week. Okay, everybody. Jai Guru Dev. Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.